Hey, this is Jonathan Fields, host of the Good Life Project podcast. Boost Mobile reminds me of what I love, when someone reimagines what's possible. They have invested billions in building America's newest 5G network, becoming the country's fourth major carrier. They are doing things differently, offering a $25 monthly unlimited plan that never increases in price and letting you try their service risk-free for 30 days. With blazing fast 5G and plans for all the latest devices, they're changing the game. Visit your nearest Boost Mobile store or find them online at boostmobile.com. The Boost Mobile network, together with their roaming partners, covers 99% of the U.S. population. 5G speeds not available in all areas.
Ever wonder what your lashes are destined for? The cards have spoken. Maybelline New York Mascara does it all. Whether you crave fully fan lashes with Lash Sensational, big, bold volume from the Colossal, a dramatic lift with Falsies Lash Lift, or natural-looking volume from Great Lash, your perfect lash future awaits. Manifest your best mascara today. Shop Maybelline New York and discover your lash destiny. Shop now at Walmart.
Hi there, and welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. Today we're looking a little bit more at the experience of Black Americans during the Second World War. We're looking at diving a bit into Max Hastings, as we did earlier in the week, but we're looking at a variety of things, really. Um, so war, especially things like the First and the Second World War, these wars of, in some cases, national survival, and wars in which the entirety of society needs to be mobilised, have very powerful transforming effects on the rest of society, um, because groups who are marginalised, often persecuted, and who are suppressed in have their kind of their rights suppressed, because they have labour power, and because they can be drafted into uniform, they suddenly find that they are less powerless than previously as a result of the war. During the First World War, there's a huge migration to the northern states of America. It was interesting when I spoke with Tom Lutz last week, and the kind of the flowering in the 1920s of black culture, black writing, and music was as a result of new black communities establishing themselves in the north, particularly in Harlem and the Harlem Renaissance. During the First World War, because they were going there to work in munitions and other war-related manufacturing. During the Second World War, similar transition happens from the rural south to the urban north, and this time it's around the Great Lakes. Detroit, Chicago, Flint, and other great manufacturing cities that churned out the aircraft and the tanks and the jeeps and the trucks and the artillery shells for the war. So a kind of an industrial, a second kind of industrial revolution happens during the Second World War in America, and Black Americans' experience is transformed as a result of this. they are less that they are placed in a more effective bargaining position when there are disputes in the shipyards of Atlanta about skilled work, about black workers accessing skilled work. The threat of black workers possibly downing tools and walking out, and that happening en masse across the American defense and war manufacturing theatre, is enough in 1942 for Roosevelt to legislate for fair employment practices during the war and in defense work. This leads, of course, to white workers becoming much more militant, racially militant or racistly militant in response. And the issue of the rights for black workers to access better paid skilled work is a kind of an open wound throughout the rest of the war. Also, America had a kind of a huge blind spot when it comes to, or a huge kind of area of vulnerability when it comes to its propaganda efforts to prosecute some sort of kind of moral war against the evils of Nazism. Not that, to begin with, much American public rhetoric is focused on that at all. America's war begins as a result of the attack by the Japanese, and America uses its Lend-Lease initially to give the Soviet and mainly Soviet, but to some, but also British allies, the war materials that they need. And for the first couple of years of the war, very little is mentioned about Nazi racial policy. It's only later on in the war, when the knowledge of the Holocaust becomes, after 1943, really turns from a kind of a trickle to a torrent, that the language begins to change. But the idea that a war was being fought for freedom and democracy and all these other things sits ill with the idea of segregated workplaces, segregated armies, and segregated states, particularly in the southern portion of America. So the status and role of the black GI and the black war worker is a complex one. You only need to look back at the previous war, and if you read the memoir Black Bolshevik by Harry Hayward, which is a great book, the conscious level of discrimination in the American army during the First World War and segregation is really kind of explicit. There is Hayward writes about an advert in a newspaper he saw that the US Army was looking for, kind of Southern gentlemen to become officers, of all, white gentlemen to become officers of all black regiments. Why? Because in the advert it said we're looking for white men who have experience, quote unquote, handling Negroes. And what that means is we need white men who are experienced in ordering black men around and telling them what's what and telling them what to do and telling them, that white men are in charge. And it was thought that as a southern man, but not working class, but a southern man of the more elite classes would be perfect for that kind of role, because it's, the culture that they exist in. Not to suggest that there were not examples of this sort of thing in the northern states, but far less part of the kind of cultural and social DNA. Anyway, in the Second World War, as we know, black GIs and other servicemen and women come to Great Britain in the build-up to D-Day. Their role in actual fighting and other kinds of things is still really being uncovered, and it's more extensive than we think. But their experience of life in Britain is really quite different, particularly black men that come from the south. It's not to suggest that Britain was some sort of wonderful post-racial utopia, far from it. Britain can be quite racist when it chooses to be, but it's a racism of a different variety. There were communities in Britain, here in Cardiff where I live, the oldest all black community in the United Kingdom has been here for maybe 300 years, around Bute Town and Tiger Bay. And places in parts of Bristol and London, there were black communities that had been the product of Britain's kind of maritime empire. It's where black sailors from the Caribbean and from Africa simply stayed. And so there was a black presence in Britain, far smaller black presence than you'd find in America. But of course, there was no history of plantation slavery in Britain. Britain's plantations had been overseas, and so most white British people, whilst they looked at their kind of empire as something that happens out there, and often really didn't really encounter much of the empire, sometimes viewed it as kind of rather strange or anomalous or worrying or threatening that there are non-white people in their communities. But there is no history of plantation slavery in Britain. There's no series of events like the Civil War to abolish plantation slavery in Britain. There is no Reconstruction era in Britain, and there is no failure of Reconstruction, and therefore there is no Jim Crow in Britain. So racism is far less embedded in society and state. It's more part of the kind of the broader, widespread European racial superiority that is the product of empire. Anyway, that's a long way of kind of explaining the differences, but it explains why it is that black GIs could go for a drink in a British pub and there be very little kind of hassle or anything really. I mean, there's very little recorded, and I would, if I'm wrong, by the way, and you're a historian of the black American GI experience in Britain, and you want to write to me and tell me, I'm happy to stand corrected. But there is very little recorded about overt white British discrimination in public places towards black servicemen. It's white GIs that create this sort of trouble. And so British pubs were happy to serve black servicemen, and it was white GIs and white military police that wanted to impose, they had no mandate to do it, wanted to impose a de facto segregation on white British pubs, and tell landlords that they couldn't serve black GIs, which doesn't go down very well with British publicans, not because they were kind of committed anti-racists, but because they resented Americans swaggering into their workplaces and their public houses, telling them what to do. So here we're going to dive into a bit more from Max.
Instacart is on a mission to have you not leave the couch this basketball season. Because between the pregame rituals and the postgame interviews, it can be difficult to find time for everything else. So let Instacart take care of your game day snacks or weekly restocks and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Because we hear it's bad luck to be hungry on game day. So download the Instacart app today and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 orders. Service fees apply for 3 orders in 14 days, excludes restaurants.
Did you know that foreign investors are quietly funding lawsuits in American courts through a practice called third-party litigation funding? Shadowy overseas funders are paying to sue American companies in our courts, and they don't pay a dime in U.S. taxes if there is an award or settlement. They profit tax-free from our legal system, while U.S. companies are tied up in court, and American families pay the price, to the tune of $5,000 a year. But there is a solution. A new proposal before Congress would close this loophole and ensure these foreign investors pay taxes, just like the actual plaintiffs have to. It's a common-sense move that discourages frivolous and abusive lawsuits and redirects resources back into American jobs, innovation, and growth. Only President Trump and congressional Republicans can deliver this win for America and hold these foreign investors accountable. Contact your lawmakers today and demand they take a stand to end foreign-funded litigation abuse.
Out here, we feel things. The sore calves that lead to epic views, the cool waterfall mist during a hot hike, and the breeze that hits just right at the summit. But hey, don't just listen to us. Experience it for yourself. All Trails makes it easy to discover the best of the outdoors, with more than 450,000 trails around the world, points of interest along the trail, and offline maps for always-on navigation. Download the free app today and find your next outdoor adventure.
Black Americans had cause to regard the Crusade for Freedom with skepticism, for much of the country was racially segregated, as were the armed forces. An army recruit at John Capano's training camp in South Carolina, there were signs outside the local restaurant. I'm going to use the unpleasant word now, so brace yourselves. Niggers and Yanks not welcome. This is Carolina. This is South. This is the South. So it meant sort of white Northerners not welcome either. He said it was a very white troop which fought running battles with the blacks in the motor pool. 1940 witnessed 6 recorded lynchings of black Americans in the South, 4 of them in Georgia, and many more floggings, 3 of them fatal. Virginia matrons delivered a formal protest about Eleanor Roosevelt's presence at a mixed dance in Washington. The danger, they wrote to the president, lies not in the degeneration of the girls who participated in the dance, for they were already of the lowest type of female, but in the fact that Mrs. Roosevelt lent her presence and dignity to this humiliating affair, that the wife of the President of the United States sanctioned a dance including both races, and that her lead might be followed by unthinking whites. So this fascinating letter, really. There's so much kind of wrapped up in that kind of one little snippet of kind of eugenics, misogyny, classism, and this idea of miscegenation, of this idea of the white racial stock being downgraded by racial intermixing. But it's really, the lowest quality of white girl that's going to go down that route anyway. It's just the only bad thing is that it's the First Lady that is giving this her blessing. The 1942 influx of large numbers of black workers to join the labour force in Detroit provoked vociferous white anger, which in June erupted into serious rioting. The following year witnessed further racial disturbances in Detroit against blacks and in Los Angeles against Mexicans. The president adopted a notably muted attitude to the Detroit clash, and indeed until his death remained circumspect about racial issues. The proportion of black workers in war industries rose from 2% in 1942 to 8% in 1945, but they remained underrepresented. America's armed forces enlisted substantial numbers of African Americans, but entrusted them only a small minority with combat roles, and maintained a large measure of segregation. The American Red Cross distinguished between coloured and white blood supplies. Cynics demanded to be told the difference between park benches marked Juden in Nazi Germany and those labelled coloured in Tallahassee, Florida. And therein is a kind of a fascinating and underexplored avenue in thinking about racism, imperialism, and white racial supremacy. The question of what it was that was so fundamentally different between Nazi the Nazi first kind of segregation and persecution of the Jews, and then the wholesale destruction of the Jewish people, and the segregation, and with immense violence towards African Americans in the southern states. Both are based on essentially the same ideas of racial supremacy, of a hierarchy. There was, for example, no indication from the US government, from the president, or from anybody else that there would be a better world waiting Black Americans at the end. There was some kind of hint, nothing ever confirmed, and a lot of this was the product of Black newspapers and journalists saying that there will be some sort of dividend, some kind of payoff, something that we will be rewarded with. But nothing is ever officially offered. It is in any way, it's sort of assumed, and perhaps in some cases implied, um, and that there is a belief that
Did you know that foreign investors are quietly funding lawsuits in American courts through a practice called third-party litigation funding? Shadowy overseas funders are paying to sue American companies in our courts, and they don't pay a dime in U.S. taxes if there is an award or settlement. They profit tax-free from our legal system, while U.S. companies are tied up in court and American families pay the price, to the tune of $5,000 a year. But there is a solution. A new proposal before Congress would close this loophole and ensure these foreign investors pay taxes, just like the actual plaintiffs have to. It's a common sense move that discourages frivolous and abusive lawsuits and redirects resources back into American jobs, innovation, and growth. Only President Trump and congressional Republicans can deliver this win for America and hold these foreign investors accountable. Contact your lawmakers today and demand they take a stand to end foreign-funded litigation abuse.
Ever wonder what your lashes are destined for? The cards have spoken. Maybelline New York Mascara does it all. Whether you crave fully fan lashes with Lash Sensational, big, bold volume from the Colossal, a dramatic lift with Falsies Lash Lift, or natural-looking volume from Great Lash, your perfect lash future awaits. Manifest your best mascara today. Shop Maybelline New York and discover your lash destiny. Shop now at Walmart.
Black soldiers or Black Americans would be rewarded, or they would be able to demonstrate kind of value and fealty to this to America, to the nation, and that white society would recognize their service and recognize their contribution, which of course it doesn't really do. There's a spate of quite high profile murders, which after the end of the Second World War, of returning Black veterans, which, in fairness to Truman, he's appalled by. Truman himself was a veteran of the First World War, and arguably puts more effort into ending discrimination in the army than Roosevelt had. Well, no, certainly he does. But these were Black men returning in their uniforms, sometimes with medals, feeling, again, empowered, feeling proud, feeling that they had, when they'd been demobilized, the experience of war had changed them, had forged them, had made, for want of a better word, men of them, and that they could return to their communities with their head held high. And there were white people who hadn't gone to war, who were threatened by this, resentful of this, fearful of this, and the idea of the empowered black man is something very threatening and frightening to them. And these absolutely disgraceful, appalling, shameful murders occur. And there are several isolated cases in 1945 and 1946 where this happens. They reach national attention. And in that regard, I think there is a widespread body of white public opinion that's, particularly in the northern states, that's pretty horrified by this. But the contribution of Black Americans to the war effort in the Second World War goes largely ignored. You do have examples of Black GIs, Black Marines, Black Airmen, particularly the Tuskegee fighter pilots, who were the graduates of the Tuskegee College, and there are various kind of figures, such as the Navy cook Dory Miller, who shot down apparently a Japanese aircraft at Pearl Harbor. He just stopped what he was doing. Obviously, I think he might have been on the USS Arizona, I think, and grabbed a deck gun and started shooting. Supposedly brought down a Japanese plane. So, but there are these figures. Dory Miller, I think, died a couple of years later. He was hit in his ship was sunk in the Pacific. But for the most part, there is still a huge history of unknown stories of Black GIs. There's a really interesting bit in Set the Night on Fire by Mike Davis and Mike Weiner, where they talk about California in the 1960s, and this is instructive, I think. And in the intro, it talks about how we associate surfing with being white, with whiteness, with the Beach Boys and that kind of thing, Dick Dale and his Deltones, that kind of white surf music and surf culture. He said Black people like to surf as well. However, the beaches in California were segregated, so they didn't get to. And as a result, and kind of culturally and racially, Black people are edited out of the surfing story. Now, the reason I say that is because we imagine the kind of the tokenism that we've given the story of Black involvement, Black service, particularly American Black service, I'm talking about here exclusively, in the Second World War. We imagine that we've covered it all. We now have a picture, and it's a kind of a minority one. The facts suggest otherwise, that there were Black servicemen doing more and involved in more and risking more and involved in active service more than the official record tends to suggest. And there's a whole subsequent history of Black servicemen in the Second World War that's yet really to be written. Okay. Anyway, I'll leave you on that thought, and thanks so much for listening. It's been a really interesting week this week. I particularly enjoyed yesterday's podcast conversation, and we have some more stuff coming for you soon. Take good care. All the best. Bye-bye.
Hey, this is Naomi Ekperigan, co-host of the podcast Couples Therapy. I wanted to talk to you about Boost Mobile, the newest 5G network in the country. Boost Mobile's new network delivers customers the speed and service they'd expect from the big three, plus groundbreaking benefits you'd only get from a true challenger in the industry, like letting people try the network risk-free for 30 days, and offering a $25 per month unlimited plan that's guaranteed to never go up in price. So visit your nearest Boost Mobile store or find them online at boostmobile.com.
Did you know that foreign investors are quietly funding lawsuits in American courts through a practice called third-party litigation funding? Shadowy overseas funders are paying to sue American companies in our courts, and they don't pay a dime in U.S. taxes if there is an award or settlement. They profit tax-free from our legal system, while U.S. companies are tied up in court and American families pay the price, to the tune of $5,000 a year. But there is a solution. A new proposal before Congress would close this loophole and ensure these foreign investors pay taxes, just like the actual plaintiffs have to. It's a common sense move that discourages frivolous and abusive lawsuits and redirects resources back into American jobs, innovation, and growth. Only President Trump and congressional Republicans can deliver this win for America and hold these foreign investors accountable. Contact your lawmakers today and demand they take a stand to end foreign-funded litigation abuse.